Most people think Singapore is just another overpriced Asian financial hub, where a coffee costs $20 and you need a trust fund just to survive a weekend. They're wrong. Dead wrong. While everyone's arguing about whether you can afford a beer in this city-state, I spent 3 months testing a theory that sounds absolutely insane. You can not only survive in Singapore on $800 a month, you can actually thrive. But here's the catch. You need to know which Singapore you're living in. See, there are actually 2 Singapores existing in the same space. There's the Instagram Singapore with its infinity pools, robot bartenders, and hotel rooms that cost more than most people's rent. Then there's the real Singapore where aunties serve you 5-course meals for $3, where public transport is so efficient it makes Swiss trains look amateur. And where the same government that fines you for chewing gum also makes sure a bowl of noodles never costs more than a fancy latte back home. The question isn't whether Singapore is expensive. It absolutely can be. The question is whether you're smart enough to crack the code that 4 million locals have been using for decades. Because while tourists are dropping $50 on cocktails at Marina Bay Sands, the guy sitting next to them on the MRT tomorrow morning just had breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the same price. The difference? He knows something they don't. This isn't about being cheap. This is about understanding a system so precisely engineered that even its budget options work better than luxury alternatives in most other countries. Singapore didn't become one of the world's richest nations by accident. They figured out how to make efficiency profitable at every level. The same obsession with optimization that created their economic miracle also created the most sophisticated budget survival system on the planet. But before we crack that code, you need to understand what you're actually dealing with. Singapore isn't just a city with unusual rules. It's a completely different way of organizing human civilization. And it happened so fast that even the people who built it are still figuring out what they created. If you dropped Singapore onto a map without any labels, most people would assume it's just a medium-sized city. They'd be technically correct. At 278 square miles, it's smaller than Los Angeles, smaller than London, about the size of New York's 5 boroughs combined. But here's where geography gets weird. This tiny island sits at the exact point where the Indian Ocean meets the South China Sea, where the ancient spice routes converged, where every major shipping lane in Asia has to pass through. For 700 years, whoever controlled this little dot controlled the flow of goods, people, and ideas between East and West. The British figured this out in 1819 when a guy named Stamford Raffles looked at a sleepy fishing village and said, "We're building a port here." They were right. Within decades, Singapore became the most important stop between London and Hong Kong, a place where Chinese merchants, Indian traders, Malay sailors, and European colonists created something that had never existed before: a functioning multicultural society with no ethnic majority. But the real magic happened after independence in 1965. Singapore got kicked out of Malaysia. Yes, kicked out, not liberated, and suddenly found itself as an independent nation with no natural resources, no military, no hinterland, and a population that spoke 4 different languages. Most political scientists predicted it would collapse within a decade. Instead, it became the Switzerland of Asia in less than 30 years. How? They turned their weaknesses into strengths. No natural resources? Fine. We'll become a hub for everyone else's resources. No military tradition? We'll make ourselves so economically valuable that attacking us would be financial suicide. No common culture? We'll create a system where different cultures can coexist without losing their identity. Too small to matter? We'll become so efficient at everything that size becomes irrelevant. The result is a place that shouldn't exist, but works better than almost anywhere else. It's a Chinese-majority country where the working language is English, where Muslim calls to prayer echo across Buddhist temples, where you can get authentic Indian curry, Chinese dim sum, and Malay satay within 3 blocks of each other. Singapore didn't just survive its contradictions, it turned them into a competitive advantage. This is crucial for understanding the $800 challenge. because the same mindset that created modern Singapore also created its cost of living structure. Everything here is expensive if you don't understand the system, and remarkably affordable if you do. The government that charges luxury prices for cars also subsidizes food, housing, and transport for everyone else. They make some things incredibly expensive to discourage them, and other things incredibly cheap to encourage them. Living in Singapore means learning to think like Singapore, strategically, efficiently, with multiple backup plans. Locals don't just know where to eat cheaply. They know why the government wants them to eat cheaply, and how to use that knowledge. They don't just follow rules, they understand the logic behind the rules, which makes the system work for them instead of against them. This extends to everything. When Singaporeans talk about kiasu culture, the fear of losing out, they're not just describing social anxiety. They're describing a survival mechanism that evolved in a place where efficiency means everything, where being 5 minutes late or choosing the wrong queue can cascade into real consequences. It sounds stressful to outsiders, but it's actually what makes the $800 lifestyle possible. Think about it. In most cities, budget living means accepting lower quality, longer commutes, and constant compromises. In Singapore, budget living means understanding a system designed to reward smart choices. The hawker stall that serves better food than most restaurants isn't an accident, it's policy. The public housing that's cleaner and safer than private apartments in most countries is not luck, it's intentional. The transport system that gets you anywhere in the city for under $2 is Aunt Charity. It's economic strategy. But here's what no guidebook tells you. Singaporean culture is not just about following rules and eating good food. It's about navigating the space between order and chaos, between individual ambition and collective harmony, between being Asian and being global. This creates social dynamics that are completely different from anywhere else. Take the concept of face, maintaining reputation and dignity in social interactions. In most Asian countries, this creates rigid hierarchies and careful formality. In Singapore, it gets mixed with Western directness and multicultural pragmatism, creating something entirely new. Singaporeans can be incredibly blunt about practical matters while remaining extremely polite about personal ones. They'll tell you exactly why your business plan won't work, then invite you for coffee to make sure you don't feel bad about it. This shows up in dating, work, family relationships, even casual conversations with strangers. There's an underlying assumption that everyone's trying to optimize their situation, that this is normal and healthy, but that you should do it in ways that don't damage the larger system. It's individualism with guardrails, competition with cooperation, ambition with consideration. For someone living on $800, this cultural framework is actually an advantage. Singaporeans respect resourcefulness and efficiency. They don't judge you for eating at hawker stalls instead of restaurants. They judge you for eating at bad hawker stalls instead of good ones. They don't think you're poor for taking public transport. They think you're smart for avoiding the insane costs of car ownership. They don't see budget living as failure. They see it as a skill. The key is understanding that Singapore optimized for outcomes, not appearances. The grandmother selling you lunch for $3 probably owns her apartment outright and has a retirement fund that would make most Americans jealous. The guy in the perfectly pressed shirt taking the MRT to his banking job might be saving more money per month than most people in supposedly cheaper cities. The system works because everyone at every income level has incentives to make smart choices. This brings us to the heart of Singapore's food culture, which isn't just about eating. It's about how a society organizes itself around shared resources. When UNESCO declared Singapore's hawker culture a World Heritage Tradition, they weren't just celebrating good food. They were recognizing one of the most sophisticated systems of community organization ever created. Hawker centers aren't restaurants. They're social institutions. Each stall specializes in just a few dishes, perfected over decades, served at prices the government helps subsidize. But the real genius is in the economics. rent is kept artificially low, turnover is managed to maintain quality, and the whole system creates thousands of small businesses that can't be replicated by chains or corporations. This is why you can get a plate of chicken rice that would cost $30 in a Western restaurant for $3 at a hawker center. It's not just cheap ingredients, it's structural efficiency. The uncle making your noodles doesn't pay market-rate rent, doesn't need to hire servers or managers, doesn't waste money on ambiance or marketing. He just makes incredible food and trusts that the system will bring customers to him. But here's what makes it work for the $800 challenge. Hawker food isn't budget food pretending to be good. It's legitimately world-class cuisine that happens to be affordable. The same dishes served in Singapore's Michelin-starred restaurants often originated in hawker stalls. The techniques, the recipes, the standards are identical. The only difference is the setting and the markup. This creates a food ecosystem where eating well costs less than eating poorly. A hamburger and fries at McDonald's costs more than laksa from a stall that's been perfecting the same recipe for 40 years. A fancy salad at a health food chain costs more than a balanced meal of rice, vegetables, and protein that provides better nutrition and more flavor. The drink culture follows the same logic. Kopi and teh tarik aren't just beverages. They're precision-engineered caffeine delivery systems that cost less than $1. The uncle making your coffee learned his technique from someone who learned it from someone else, creating consistency that Starbucks can only dream about. And because the whole system runs on volume and efficiency, there's no incentive to upsell you on larger sizes or expensive modifications. Even alcohol follows this pattern, though it requires more local knowledge. Singaporeans don't go to tourist bars. They go to coffee shops that serve beer, neighborhood places with no atmosphere but perfect execution, rooftop locations that locals discovered before they became trendy. The same beer that costs $15 in Clarke Quay costs $3 at a Zichar stall 20 minutes away on public transport. This isn't just about saving money. It's about accessing the real social fabric of the city. Hawker centers are where business deals happen, where families gather, where different ethnic communities interact daily. They're also where you learn the unwritten rules of Singapore, how to chop a table with tissue packets, why you should never take the last piece of anything, how to navigate the complex etiquette of sharing space with strangers. The dating culture in Singapore reflects all these same contradictions and efficiencies, but with added layers of family expectations, career pressures, and multicultural complications. It's a place where traditional Asian values meet Western individualism, where economic pragmatism shapes romantic choices, where the same person might have completely different dating standards depending on whether they see you as casual fun or marriage material. Singaporean women are, on average, among the most educated and economically independent in Asia. They are also dealing with family pressure to marry and have children in a society where the government actively worries about birth rates. This creates dating dynamics that are simultaneously progressive and conservative, liberated and constrained. For expats on a budget, this actually creates opportunities that don't exist in more expensive cities. Singaporean dating culture values substance over flash, intelligence over income, long-term compatibility over short-term excitement. A woman who's building her own career isn't impressed by expensive dinners. She's impressed by interesting conversations and genuine connection. Someone who grew up with hawker food doesn't see budget dates as cheap. They see them as authentic. The nightlife follows similar patterns. Yes, Singapore has world-famous rooftop bars and celebrity chef restaurants. But it also has a thriving local scene that tourists rarely discover. Karaoke lounges where you can spend an entire evening for $20, neighborhood bars where conversation matters more than cocktail presentation, late-night food courts where the real social mixing happens. This is where the multicultural aspect becomes crucial. In a city where Chinese, Malay, Indian, and expat communities all socialize differently, there are multiple parallel social scenes operating simultaneously. Understanding this gives you options that single-culture cities can't match. You can have a Chinese banquet dinner, Indian classical music, Malay traditional dance, and Western-style clubbing all in the same night, all within walking distance, all at different price points. But the real secret of Singapore's social life is that it's built around efficiency and practicality rather than status and display. People want to have fun, meet interesting people, and build relationships without spending their entire salary on weekend entertainment. This creates a social ecosystem where creativity and personality matter more than spending power. The festival calendar shows how this multiculturalism works in practice. Chinese New Year isn't just celebrated by Chinese Singaporeans. It's a national holiday that everyone participates in, with traditions adapted for modern urban life. Deepavali features light displays that rival Christmas decorations anywhere in the world. Hari Raya creates community celebrations that welcome neighbors regardless of religion. Thaipusam brings ancient Tamil traditions into contemporary city settings. What's remarkable is how the government supports all of this while maintaining secular governance. Singapore figured out how to be multicultural without being fragmented, religious without being sectarian, traditional without being backward-looking. The same efficiency that makes their economy work makes their cultural integration work. For someone living on $800, this festival calendar becomes a source of free entertainment, cultural education, and social connection that would cost thousands in most other cities. The Chinese New Year markets, Deepavali light displays, Hari Raya open houses, and National Day celebrations are all publicly funded, professionally organized, and genuinely inclusive. But the deeper value is in understanding how Singaporeans balance individual freedom with community harmony, modern ambition with traditional values, global outlook with local identity. This isn't just cultural tourism. It's a master class in how diverse societies can actually function. Now, let's address the central question. Can you actually survive on $800 a month in one of the world's most expensive cities? The answer is yes, but only if you're willing to live like a local rather than a tourist, and only if you understand that surviving in Singapore can mean living better than thriving in cheaper cities. Housing is the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity. Tourist accommodations in Singapore are legitimately expensive. Hotels, serviced apartments, and short-term rentals can easily consume your entire budget. But Singapore also has the most sophisticated public housing system in the world, and creative budget travelers have figured out how to access parts of it. Hostels in residential areas cost $20 to $30 per night, but monthly rates drop to $15 per night or less. Shared apartments in HDB flats, Singapore's public housing, can cost between $300 and $500 per month for a decent room. The key is understanding that HDB flats are neat, cheap housing. They're where 80% of Singaporeans live, including doctors, lawyers, and government ministers. These aren't American-style housing projects. HDB estates are integrated communities with their own hawker centers, clinics, schools, and transport connections. Many are better designed and maintained than luxury condominiums. Living in an HDB flat does not mean living in poverty. It means living in the system that Singapore actually built for its people. Food costs can range from impossible to incredibly reasonable depending on your approach. Tourist restaurants and Western chains will destroy any budget. But hawker centers, Z-char stalls, and neighborhood coffee shops can feed you well for $5 to $8 per day. That is not survival food. That is better nutrition and flavor than most people get in supposedly cheaper cities. Transport is where Singapore's efficiency becomes your advantage. The MRT and bus system can get you anywhere in the country for under $2. Monthly transport passes cost less than a single taxi ride in most major cities. More importantly, everything is designed around public transport so you're never fighting the system or making compromises. Entertainment and social life require local knowledge but not big budgets. Free concerts, festivals, and cultural events happen constantly. Parks, beaches, and hiking trails cost nothing. Museums and attractions have resident rates that are a fraction of tourist prices. The real social scene happens in hawker centers, void decks, and neighborhood gatherings that welcome anyone who shows genuine interest. The hidden costs are where discipline becomes crucial. Singapore's famous fines aren't just about control. They're about making sure shared resources work for everyone. But they're also completely avoidable if you follow basic rules. Don't litter, don't smoke where you shouldn't, don't eat on trains, don't make noise late at night. These aren't arbitrary restrictions. They're the social contract that makes everything else possible. Healthcare costs are surprisingly reasonable for basic needs, and emergency care is world-class. Education opportunities, including language learning and professional development, are heavily subsidized. Internet and phone service costs less than most developed countries. Shopping for necessities is competitive and efficient. The real test isn't whether $800 covers your expenses. It's whether you can adapt to a system that rewards different behaviors than you might be used to. Singapore works for people who plan ahead, research their options, respect shared spaces, and optimize for long-term outcomes. It punishes impulsive decisions, status-seeking behavior, and individualism that ignores community impact. But for people who can make that adjustment, $800 doesn't just cover survival. It covers a lifestyle that includes world-class infrastructure, incredible food, cultural diversity, perfect safety, tropical weather, and access to all of Southeast Asia. That's not just budget travel. That's life optimization. Transportation in Singapore isn't just about getting around. It's about participating in one of the most sophisticated social experiments in urban planning ever attempted. The MRT system isn't just efficient. It's the nervous system of a city-state that reorganized itself around the idea that individual mobility should serve collective prosperity. When Singapore's leaders decided to build their mass transit system in the 1980s, they weren't just solving traffic problems. They were engineering social behavior. By making public transport faster, cheaper, and more reliable than private transport, they created incentives that shaped how people live, work, and socialize. The result is a city where car ownership is a luxury rather than a necessity, where housing and business development follows transit lines, where social mixing happens naturally rather than by design. For someone living on $800, this transportation philosophy becomes a massive advantage. In most cities, budget living means accepting longer commutes, unreliable transport, and social isolation. In Singapore, the MRT connects you to job opportunities, social scenes, and cultural experiences more efficiently than owning a car would in most other places. But the real genius is in the details. Trains run every 2 to 3 minutes during peak hours, every 5 to 6 minutes during off-peak times. Stations are designed with air conditioning, phone service, and retail outlets that make waiting pleasant rather than tedious. The system connects seamlessly with buses, taxis, and ride-sharing services, creating transport options for every situation and budget. The costs reflect this efficiency. Basic trips cost between 60 cents and $2, with distance-based pricing that rewards shorter journeys. Monthly passes cost about $60 and cover unlimited travel on trains and buses. Compare this to cities where monthly transport passes cost twice as much and cover systems that are slower, dirtier, and less reliable. Walking and cycling infrastructure follows the same philosophy. Singapore is tropical, but covered walkways, underground connections, and strategically placed air conditioning make pedestrian movement comfortable year-round. Bike-sharing systems provide short-term mobility for areas not directly served by trains. Everything connects to everything else, creating transportation flexibility that reduces the need for expensive backup options. The car ownership system demonstrates how Singapore uses pricing to shape behavior. The Certificate of Entitlement (COE) system means that the right to own a car can cost more than the car itself, currently around $60,000 for a basic vehicle license, before you even buy the vehicle. Registration, insurance, gas, and parking add thousands more per year. This isn't government cruelty, it's economic engineering. By making car ownership extremely expensive, Singapore prevents traffic congestion, reduces pollution, funds public transport expansion, and creates urban density that supports walkable neighborhoods. The people who do own cars generally have both the income to afford them and genuine need for private transport. For visitors and residents on limited budgets, this system creates opportunities rather than restrictions. Roads are uncongested because most people take efficient alternatives. Parking is available because demand is artificially limited. Ride-sharing and taxi services work reliably because traffic flows smoothly. The high cost of car ownership subsidizes alternatives that work better for most people most of the time. Even the Grab and taxi systems reflect Singapore's optimization obsession. Ride-sharing apps work seamlessly with public transport schedules. Airport connections are efficient and reasonably priced. Cross-border transport to Malaysia integrates with domestic systems. Everything is designed to reduce friction and maximize flexibility. This transportation philosophy extends beyond moving people to moving goods, information, and money. Singapore's position as a logistics hub means that everything from food delivery to international shipping works with unusual efficiency. The same systems that get you across the city in 30 minutes can get products from anywhere in the world to your door in hours or days rather than weeks. But the deeper impact is social and cultural. When public transport works better than private alternatives, social mixing increases. When getting around is cheap and reliable, economic segregation decreases. When transportation infrastructure connects different neighborhoods and communities, cultural integration happens naturally. The attractions and hidden gems of Singapore reveal the difference between a city built for tourists and a city-state built for residents who happen to welcome visitors. The famous landmarks, Marina Bay Sands, Gardens by the Bay, Sentosa Island, are genuinely impressive and worth experiencing. But they're also expensive and designed primarily for people who don't live here permanently. The real Singapore exists in spaces that didn't make it into tourism marketing campaigns. Pulau Ubin preserves what Singapore looked like before development, with kampong houses, mangrove forests, and traditional fishing villages accessible by a 10-minute bumboat ride that costs $3. East Coast Park stretches for 15 kilometers along the southern shore, offering beaches, cycling paths, seafood restaurants, and sunset views without entrance fees or tourist crowds. Kampong Glam maintains Singapore's Arab and Muslim heritage with traditional architecture, family-run businesses, and cultural sites that function as community gathering places rather than museum pieces. Chinatown and Little India offer similar experiences for their respective communities. Authentic cultural spaces that serve local needs while welcoming respectful visitors. The wet markets showcase Singapore's approach to food distribution: efficient, hygienic, competitive, and community-focused. These aren't tourist attractions. They're where locals buy groceries, socialize with neighbors, and maintain connections to traditional food preparation methods. Understanding how to navigate wet markets means understanding how Singapore feeds itself. Neighborhood coffee shops, or kopitiams, serve as informal community centers where business deals happen, political discussions unfold, and social networks maintain themselves. Each neighborhood has its own ecosystem of regular customers, preferred stalls, and unwritten social protocols. Learning to be comfortable in kopitiams means learning to be comfortable in Singapore. The rooftop bars and hidden speakeasies that locals frequent operate on completely different economic models than tourist venues. They focus on neighborhood clientele, reasonable prices, and consistency rather than novelty and markup. Many are literally hidden. Unmarked entrances, word-of-mouth recommendations, locations that change based on lease availability. Green spaces in Singapore demonstrate how urban planning can create natural environments rather than just preserve them. The Park Connector Network links green spaces throughout the island, creating cycling and walking routes that connect residential areas to nature reserves. McRitchie Reservoir offers hiking trails and wildlife spotting within minutes of downtown business districts. The southern ridges create elevated walkways through forest canopy that provide exercise, nature connection, and city views simultaneously. But the real hidden gem is Singapore's approach to public space activation. Void decks, the ground floors of HDB apartment blocks, function as community centers, event spaces, and social gathering areas. They host everything from weddings and funerals to exercise classes and political rallies. They're where you see how Singaporeans actually live when they're not performing for tourists or government officials. The void deck culture explains a lot about Singapore's social fabric. These spaces are owned collectively, managed by residents, and used for activities that build community connections. They're where children play safely, where elderly residents socialize, where families celebrate important events. They represent Singapore's approach to balancing individual privacy with community participation. Safety and healthcare in Singapore operate according to principles that most other countries talk about but rarely implement effectively. The famous low crime rate isn't just about strict laws, it's about social systems that reduce the conditions that create crime, combined with enforcement that's predictable rather than arbitrary. The safety system works through multiple layers: economic policies that reduce inequality, education systems that provide opportunities for advancement, community structures that maintain social connection, and law enforcement that focuses on prevention rather than punishment. The result is a place where personal security is rarely a conscious concern. For someone living on a limited budget, this safety translates into real economic advantages. You don't need to pay premium prices to live in safe neighborhoods because all neighborhoods are safe. You don't need expensive security systems or insurance policies to protect your belongings. You don't need to restrict your activities based on time of day or location concerns. The healthcare system demonstrates Singapore's approach to making quality services accessible through smart policy design. Basic healthcare is heavily subsidized for residents and reasonably priced for visitors. Emergency care is world-class and available regardless of ability to pay, with costs recovered through insurance systems and government funding rather than point-of-service charges. Preventive care, including dental services, vaccinations, and health screenings, costs less than similar services in most developed countries. Prescription medications are regulated to prevent price manipulation. Traditional medicine practices are integrated with modern healthcare, providing treatment options that match different cultural preferences and economic capabilities. The education system reflects similar principles applied to human development rather than just medical care. Adult education, language learning, professional certification, and skill development programs are subsidized and accessible. Libraries function as community learning centers with resources that would cost thousands of dollars to access privately in other countries. This creates opportunities for personal and professional development that aren't limited by economic background. Someone living on $800 can still access world-class educational resources, professional networking opportunities, and skill development programs that enhance long-term prospects. The legal and bureaucratic systems operate with efficiency and predictability that reduces hidden costs and complications. Visa processes, business registration, banking services, and government interactions follow clear procedures with reasonable timelines. Corruption is virtually non-existent, which means that official prices are actual prices rather than starting points for negotiation. For residents and long-term visitors, this systematic approach to governance creates an environment where planning and optimization are possible. Rules are clear, enforcement is consistent, and outcomes are predictable. This reduces the stress and uncertainty that consume time and money in less organized societies. The visa and work permit systems in Singapore reflect the same strategic thinking that shapes everything else about the country. They're designed to attract people who can contribute to collective prosperity while managing population growth and resource allocation. For someone testing the $800 lifestyle, understanding these systems becomes crucial for extending what might start as a short-term experiment into a longer-term opportunity. Tourist visas for most nationalities allow stays of 30 to 90 days without advance application, renewable through brief trips to neighboring countries. This creates flexibility for people who want to test Singapore living without major commitments. Student passes provide longer-term options for people willing to enroll in educational programs, many of which cost less than similar education in Western countries while providing access to Asian markets and opportunities. Work permit categories range from short-term professional assignments to long-term employment passes, each with different requirements and benefits. The system is designed to match foreign workers with economic needs while ensuring that opportunities remain available for local workers. This creates a competitive but fair environment where skills and contributions matter more than nationality or connections. The expat community in Singapore includes people from every income level and every region of the world. Contrary to popular perception, not all expats are highly paid professionals living in luxury condominiums. Many are teachers, small business owners, freelancers, and digital nomads who chose Singapore for its quality of life, central location, and economic opportunities rather than high salaries. This diverse expat community creates social and professional networks that support different lifestyle approaches. The same city that hosts millionaire investment bankers also hosts budget backpackers, struggling artists, and entrepreneur families bootstrap their businesses. The key is finding the communities and resources that match your situation rather than trying to access lifestyle options designed for different economic circumstances. Long-term residents develop strategies for navigating bureaucracy, optimizing tax situations, building professional networks, and maintaining visa status that aren't obvious to short-term visitors. These strategies often make the difference between Singapore being financially sustainable or financially devastating for people without unlimited budgets. The business environment in Singapore creates opportunities for entrepreneurship and freelancing that might not exist in other countries. The ease of business registration, access to regional markets, quality infrastructure, and government support for startups make it possible to generate income while living on a limited budget. Many digital nomads and location-independent professionals use Singapore as a base for serving clients throughout Asia. Banking and financial services in Singapore are competitive and sophisticated, with options for people at every economic level. Basic banking services cost less than similar services in most developed countries. Investment opportunities, currency exchange, and international money transfers operate efficiently and transparently. The social integration challenges and opportunities in Singapore depend largely on willingness to adapt to local cultural norms while maintaining individual authenticity. Singaporeans generally welcome foreigners who show genuine interest in understanding local culture, but they're also sensitive to people who criticize or dismiss aspects of their society without understanding the historical and practical reasons behind them. Building meaningful relationships with locals requires patience, cultural sensitivity, and genuine curiosity about different ways of organizing social life. But the rewards include access to social networks, cultural experiences, and practical knowledge that can't be gained through tourist interactions or expat-only communities. The path from visitor to resident in Singapore isn't just about meeting legal requirements. It's about demonstrating that you can contribute to the collective project of making a diverse, efficient, and prosperous society work. This requires skills and attitudes that go beyond professional qualifications to include cultural adaptability, community participation, and long-term thinking. Singapore represents something unique in human civilization: a successful attempt to create prosperity through cooperation rather than competition, efficiency through planning rather than market forces alone, and diversity through integration rather than segregation. It's not perfect and it's not suitable for everyone, but it demonstrates that alternative approaches to organizing society are possible. The $800 challenge isn't really about money. It's about understanding how systems work when they're designed for collective benefit rather than individual advantage. It's about recognizing that efficiency and community can create opportunities that don't exist in societies organized around different principles. Living successfully in Singapore on a limited budget requires the same skills that made Singapore successful as a country: strategic thinking, cultural adaptability, respect for shared resources, and optimization for long-term outcomes rather than short-term gratification. These aren't just survival skills, they're life skills that create value wherever you apply them. The question isn't whether you can survive on $800 in Singapore. Thousands of people do it successfully. The question is whether you can adapt to a system that rewards cooperation over competition, planning over improvisation, and community benefit over individual advantage. If you can make that adjustment, Singapore doesn't just become affordable. It becomes a master class in how human societies can actually work when they're designed thoughtfully. Singapore challenges everything we think we know about the relationship between cost of living, quality of life, and social organization. It proves that expensive cities can be accessible to people with limited budgets if systems are designed for efficiency rather than exclusion. It demonstrates that multicultural societies can function harmoniously if institutions support integration rather than separation. It shows that government intervention in markets can create opportunities rather than restrictions if policies are designed strategically rather than ideologically. The real secret of Singapore isn't that it's cheap or expensive, liberal or conservative, Eastern or Western. The secret is that it's a place where people figured out how to make seemingly contradictory things work together: individual freedom and collective responsibility, cultural diversity and social harmony, economic growth and environmental sustainability, global connectivity, and local community. Comment below if you're ready to test whether you can crack the Singapore code, whether you think $800 is enough, or whether you've discovered your own strategies for living well on a budget in expensive cities. Because Singapore isn't just a travel destination. It's a glimpse into how human civilization might organize itself when intelligence, cooperation, and long-term thinking guide policy decisions. The Singapore experiment continues, and there's room for anyone willing to contribute to making it work. The question is whether you're ready to think differently about what's possible when societies optimize for collective prosperity rather than individual advantage. Because once you understand how Singapore works, you'll never look at your own city or your own budget the same way again.